And then at the end, the minister actually pulled me over and he said, let me get this Airbnb thing. This was early days of Airbnb where it wasn't, as mainstream as it is today. And he said, you guys are in the business of facilitating complete strangers staying in your house. And I said, yes, minister, yeah, that's what we do. And he said, we have entire industries to prevent this sort of thing from happening, like alarm companies and door lock companies. Like, people don't want this thing. Like, are people actually doing this? And I said, well,
Aaron, you're in the studio. Welcome.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Quickly, introduce yourself and tell us why you're in Nosara.
Yeah, my name's Aaron Zifkin. This is actually my second time in Nosara. I was here 13 years ago with a very good friend of mine, Kai Soto, our mutual friend.
Shout out to Kai.
And back here 13 years later, and been down here for 6 months on this jaunt, and looking forward to coming back again next year.
So what's the difference between 13 years ago to now in your eyes?
It's funny. I've been asked that question a bunch of times. I think there's two things that jump out to me. One is, a lot of these places that have this magic, a lot of the time they lose it. And I think that for somehow, some way, even with all this development around, there's definitely still that magic. Still got the exact same feeling I did 13 years ago, which I think is a real testament to the community. On the other side of that, obviously, some of the real estate development here is just incredible. What's coming up here, both commercial and residential. Certainly big changes there.
Now, you've been around the world and are pretty versed as far as seeing towns grow and whatnot. Are we growing a good way or a bad way? Like, what's your read on the situation?
I think it's a good way. And I think, for me, it always comes back to the community. There's so many stakeholders that make or break a community. And I think there's certainly, again, like I said, that feel that's here. I think there's, a couple of things. One is, and it's funny, every person that I've talked to that's been here, and I said, how long have you been here for? There's really the same pattern here. It's, I was here, I came for a week, came for 6 months. I ended up, doing a long-term rental. I ended up living here. And so I think people have picked up on what's special about this place. And when they finally do get here and become residents, they really want to maintain that. That said, in any development, there's always a balance between the local community, the indigenous population that has been here before, and locals coming in, and prices driving people out of towns. And I think that's an area that obviously I'd want to keep an eye on, making sure you still have that local feel.
Let's just jump right into it. You have a pretty extensive career at Airbnb, and you know how this story plays out in a lot of places in the world. So if you don't mind, if it's okay, I want to jump into that, because when you say Airbnb around here, for some people it's an evil, bad thing, and for some people it's a fantastic thing. They got them a great place to stay in a spot that was interesting. So
I think the same patterns hold true with the way that a town develops, and to your point, Airbnb can be a contentious topic. And that still holds true, even in 2021. But I think, education, conversation, and stakeholder engagement is really, really important. And what I mean by that, I can't tell you how many conversations I had with various stakeholders, and those could be, public policy officials, or union leaders. And when you had conversations with them and really drew circles around, here are the really, really great things about this model that are really, really impactful and help the community that we're operating in. These are wonderful things that we really, really want to make sure blossom. Here are the areas, here's another circle that, might not be great if we don't manage it properly. And then here's this area in the middle, this circle in the middle, where we're going to arm wrestle a little bit and really understand and have those conversations, because I think, like in any negotiation, when there's a common end goal, and a lot of the time there is, just it's understanding what that common end goal is, it's really easy to negotiate and have those conversations and come up with a good resolution. I'll tell you one funny story. Early on in my Airbnb career, and I say early, I think I was probably a couple of weeks into my time at Airbnb.
What was your position when you first got there, as you're telling the story?
So when I first started Airbnb, I was the first employee in Canada as the country manager for Canada. And so at the time, I was having a conversation with the federal minister of finance at the time. And he was having what's called a pre-budget consultation. And so he invites a bunch of stakeholders around the room to give him feedback before he pulls the budget together. And you can imagine the type of people that were around the table. You know, we're talking CFOs of the big banks and manufacturing facilities and automotive industry. And, he would sort of go around like Santa Claus around the table. What do you want? And, what do you want to see in the budget? And everybody was saying, we want tax benefits and we want less regulation. And finally came to me and, as this, young guy saying, well, actually, we'd love to be taxed and we would love regulation. And, everyone around the table sort of went like, who is this guy? And why is he saying that? And then at the end, the minister actually pulled me over and he said, let me get this Airbnb thing. This was early days of Airbnb where it wasn't, as mainstream as it is today. And he said, you guys are in the business of facilitating complete strangers staying in your house. And I said, yes, minister. Yeah, that's what we do. And he said, we have entire industries to prevent this sort of thing from happening, like alarm companies and door lock companies. Like people don't want this thing. Like, are people actually doing this? And I said, well, there was 2 million people last night alone around the world that did this thing. And so that was, those were the early conversations, right? Like, what is this thing? How does it work? It's a scary phenomenon. But if it's managed and regulated properly, then, it's a great outcome for everybody.
Go ahead and share with us how you got with the company, because that's an interesting story.
People always say, good luck is the right time. And people say, you got to make your own luck. I'm squarely in the camp of, this is definitely luck. It was 2013 and I was visiting, actually our mutual friend, funny enough. And we ended up taking a trip to Bali and we stayed in an Airbnb. He booked it for the first time. And I remember saying to myself, wow, like what an experience. We had our own place, great pinpoint location right on the beach. And it was a fraction of the cost of a hotel. And to be honest with you, I didn't think much about it. I was still traveling around the region at the time. And as I was on my way home several months later, I was passing through Singapore and I called up my friend, said, let's go out for a drink. And he wasn't there. And he said, but my buddies are going, out for a drink. You should, join them. And I said, sure, why not? And a guy actually walked into that bar that night wearing an Airbnb t-shirt. And for some reason, it didn't even occur to me that this was like a real business that was happening. And I asked him point blank, I said, I see you guys aren't in Canada. Any interest in coming to Canada? And his very quick response was, no, we're going to run it from the US, not happening. And probably 6 months later, he messaged me again and said, actually, we are coming to Canada. Would you have any interest? And, so
you launched Canada.
So launched Canada, had no clue what I was doing.
All from a bar in Singapore with some friends of a friend.
Yeah. I mean, you just couldn't script it. Everyone talks about the corporate ladder, it's a pinball game. It's not a corporate ladder,
How are you landing these interesting, amazing gigs and then spending 6 months in Nosara? Like, how are you pulling this off? Tell all the rest of us, like, how to live a life like that.
Yeah, it's it may sound like a complicated question. It's actually the simplest answer that that there is out there. And that is having great mentors and coaches. Without a doubt. I've been so fortunate in my life to have people, and I think this is a really important distinction. There's a lot of people that, would call people mentors, and those are people that you get advice from. But to me, a mentor is somebody who really takes you under their wing, who wants to impart their knowledge onto you, help you really design your life, not just be a passive, passenger on the journey. But more than anything is really passionate about seeing you succeed. And I think, if you can, and a lot of time people talk about having a mentor, and that's obviously you're very lucky if you've got one. But I've always loved having multiple people in my orbit that, come up from different backgrounds, whether they're formally trained or street fighters or entrepreneurs or whatever it is, and posing the same questions to them and getting very, very different responses. And you sort of take all that information in and massage it into something that makes sense, for yourself. But without a doubt, this is, I've been so fortunate to just, see people living these kind of lives and saying, that looks really good.
It's kind of interesting. A lot of people like you who are very successful and have had, call it luck, call it skill, call it anything, seem to land here. Why do people like you keep coming here?
I think everybody wants to feel a sense of belonging, somewhere. And everyone's got their checklist on what those things are that really fulfill their soul. And, when I was thinking about coming back here and I sort of had my rubric, the thing that I was thinking, where do I want to spend this time? Nosara just was able to check those things off. For me, it was, I really wanted to be in a place that didn't feel like a big city that I was going to get lost in. I didn't want something that was too small that, I would feel like it's way too small town. I wanted somewhere that had a really strong community aspect to it. Surfing, it's always been a passion of mine. It's pretty tricky when you're living in Toronto, Canada, to really get into the sport. And so, being lucky enough to have this chunk of time to go deep on something, and that something was surfing for me. And so, putting all those things together, I think was, Nosara really checked all those boxes.
I got you. So it sounds like there's a commonality of not too big, not too small, just enough off the beaten path, but not too much the other way. And then having other people that you can kind of relate to and have something fresh and new circled around health and wellness kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's actually been one of the nicest parts. You always hear that term, health and wellness. And for a long time, that in my mind was, got to get to the gym, get my 30 minutes, my 45 minutes in, meet with my trainer. And it was, get home from work at 5, 6 o'clock and, smash a quick workout and, try and eat a reasonably healthy meal. And then you're sitting on your couch till, midnight and, getting up the rat race, right? Sprinkling a ton of travel in different time zones and you're just sort of discombobulated. What I felt here in Nosara is, truly redefining what health and wellness is and really understanding what that is, right? Moving a little bit slower, eating really well, all of the activity, all the different modalities, that are here in terms of health and wellness. And more than anything, I think, like when you look around and the type of people that are here, the cohort that is here, people are active. And so you're inspired to be active here, which is a really nice thing to be around.
That's pretty aptly put. It does seem like seeing so many other people moving and being active, it makes it very easy to stay moving yourself.
Yeah. I mean, how great was it today when you said, "Hey, Aaron, what time do you want to kick this thing off?" And I said, "It doesn't really matter to me." And you wrote back to me very simply, "Let's do it after the morning surf session," right? Like the fact that was in the discussion was just amazing. I think, that's living in Nosara. I'm
embarrassingly proud of the story that you're saying right now because that's me being professional.
Exactly.
Oh man, it's actually, I'll go ahead and throw myself under the bus here. One of the worst things is when people are on their way here and they're planning out a trip and they plan it out by every minute. None of this is going to happen. Stop compartmentalizing your Nosara experience. And then what happens is when they get here and life does what it does, it has a way of kind of pushing back on you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested. I mean, it's really easy to fall into that here, right? It's such a nice way of living, blurring work and play and even just like, I've never been a morning person in my entire life. And here, like you're waiting for that sun to come up and to get out and in bed early. I'm really interested to see how that adjustment when I go back home for the next few months, what it's like to actually revert back to some of that again and to see, and I suspect I know the answer, right? Wanting to get back into that and making that a part.
Yeah, I think you know how this story plays out.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, that's, I don't think we have to be too scientific. I think that's the reason, why Nosara is Nosara.
That makes
right?
sense.
People go home and they say, actually, that felt really good. I felt really healthy there, both like, mentally and physically. And that's a nice thing to be around.
This place really doesn't make sense if you think about it. It's further away from the airports than other beach towns. It's certainly more expensive. Almost everybody wants to have an ocean view and to be on the beach. That's like in a check the box of wish list form. Like that's like number one. We basically have none of it. It's expensive. It's hard to get to. And why are you here? The wave's not even a good wave. Like it's not like a hard, heavy wave. And what we do have is an ultra consistent wave, an ultra consistent health, wellness, beautiful people all over the place. But at the same time, nobody's having an ocean view and staying on the beach at the same time. Like basically what I'm getting at is to stay here, you're sacrificing something that you probably wanted. Mm-hmm. But then people still want to come back. You just made the point. When I was there, I was happy. We get that all the time. people stay in Tamarindo, they stay in Samar or wherever else, and they stay right on the beach. And on the photos, it looks better. And then when they come here, they stay at a hotel not on the beach with more bugs and higher prices, but then they want to come back here.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I obviously that's a tough answer, but I like asking that question to people that I meet in town who have made that transition.
What
here.
are they saying?
I think people are really surgical when they come here. I think a lot of those other towns, and you just rifled off a bunch of reasons why you get to somewhere and say, this spot looks good and feels good, and I like.
Well,
being
on
on the
paper,
beach.
it makes more sense, right? The price is better, the view is better, the accommodations are fancier. Very few people want to stay there. Tons of people want to stay here.
I actually think it's in all of those points of friction of being here, a little bit further away, a little bit rougher. I think it's actually in those reasons why people want to be here, because you don't have those masses and those waves. You've got a really nice balance here of people that are transient, that are passing through as vacationers through Costa Rica. You've got a really nice expat community here that is here a little bit more long term. And of course, you've got a local community as well. And I think you're going to see that mix of people continue to evolve. And this year, I think this year is going to be a real transition. And we started to see it, going back to my Airbnb days. There was this term that they use that I absolutely hated every time I heard it. There was the business traveler and then the leisure traveler. And then they created a category called the bleisure traveler.
I already hate it.
Right? It was terrible, right? It's like the people that were going, I'm traveling Monday to Thursday, and then I'm going to bring my family down on Thursday, and I'm going to stay in this hotel, and, we're going to spend the weekend here, and I'm going to take a long weekend. And so it's kind of a business trip, but kind of a leisure trip. I think what you're seeing now on Airbnb, and, you're definitely seeing it in this town, and I'm sure you're seeing it with the type of supply and what the supply is doing here. You're seeing a lot more people, not just spending more time in these short-term rentals, longer periods of time, but they're living on the Airbnbs of the world today, right? People do not have primary homes anymore. They're going out and they're saying, I'm going to be there for 6 months, and then I'm going to be there, the digital nomad. And these models are very conducive to that. And I think now with the work from home policies that you're seeing for most of these companies that they're announcing, we're just going to continue to see more and more of that.
Got it. So you see a promulgation of this is just going to keep going. It's going. Like the
Absolutely.
machine started.
I think the pendulum will swing back. I still think there will be, there will be that home base for a lot of companies where people will need to be somewhere for an offsite once a quarter kind of thing. But those days of I got to be in San Francisco, New York every single week and show my face, those days are done. But I think the pendulum will swing back. There's still a lot of magic that happens in an office when you get humans together. A lot of trust, is built, and that's a really tough thing that you can't replicate those on Zoom calls.
That's actually a good point. So what's going to happen for here next season compared to this season? Because we had COVID, everything shut down, things were weird. Inter-country tourism got going. Some hotels, like, for example, Gilded Iguana did a great job of targeting people who live here. So now the people who live here are coming, and now that planes are flying again, the people who don't, they're coming too, and this past season was nuts.
I think a couple of things are going to, obviously tough to read the tea leaves, tough to speculate where it's going to go, but here
well, hey, it's not like we're recording this and going to show it to the whole world, but
totally.
you're paying us.
It's just between us. I think there's a couple of things that are gonna happen next season. One is you're gonna see a lot of pent up travel demand just coming. Right?
Didn't we just see that? Is it the same thing, or is there more?
I don't think so. I think what you're seeing is a lot of people who did the escape. Right? Case in point.
So
right?
the wealthy people who can't escape are the ones who we just saw. You're saying next year it's actually going to get more?
And I don't think it's limited to wealthy people. In fact, I think it's right across the spectrum.
Well, Nosara is kind of limited to wealthy people because not everyone can afford.
Yeah, I think you're seeing a lot of people who are getting like Airbnbs that have 3 or 4 bedrooms and are splitting them between 3 or 4 different groups of people. So I think you'll see a lot of interesting things like that taking off. But I think you'll see people who are traveling closer to home. So you might see a lot more local tourism coming here, San Jose, etc., coming down. You'll see a lot of people that are coming down, and the average length of stay, I think, will be increased. So I think, gone are the days of the 5-day quick mission down to Nosara. I think you're going to see people coming back for a couple of weeks just because, it's a little bit stickier. And again, just bleeding that idea of like, I can work from there, right? So I'll extend my trip.
we get long-term rental requests every day. And everyone's like, hey, I want to get something like 2, 3, 4,000 a month. 3, 4, 5 bedroom with the pool, walking distance to the beach in Keone, and see if you can just knock that out for me real quick. It's comically difficult. Like, it's so challenging. How does this town fit in? Because we don't have, it's not like a city where it's just Airbnbs everywhere. Here it's very pocketed, right? Like if you have close to beach K section, G section, J, any of those, very much in demand, but there's not much of it. And there's very little available. Heavens knows if you want to buy cheap real estate close to the beach here, good luck with that. Those days are gone. So I guess what I'm saying is, Nosara, if it's going to be even bigger, based off the price adjustments we had this last year, like it's just hard for me to comprehend. I moved here when you had to beg someone to buy here to even think about it. It seems so risky and crazy. And now it's not like that at all. So it's the same town with the same vibe, but it's also, in my mind, completely flipped upside down. It's like, it's hard to describe. Yeah.
I mean, that's the quintessential, marketplace dynamic, right? Supply and demand, right? And, no question demand's going to be up, and, can supply follow suit?
Around Nosara, we like to get on the internet and bitch and moan and talk our smack and think it makes a difference. It doesn't at all. But this is what we do. We hop online and we like to say developers and realtors and people are driving this place crazy and they're making all their millions and ruining it. If somebody ever responds with, hey, this is just supply and demand, this is how this works everywhere on the planet. Some places are expensive, some places aren't, and this is how it goes. That gets attacked. You, a voice of logic and reason from big companies who watches the whole planet with what you do. What do you have to say about all that?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the neatest things, I think, of my experience, watching with Airbnb and even Lyft for that matter. A lot of the time these companies and these models get a lot of flack in the media just because they become, lightning rods. Right. But here's the one thing that I can say unequivocally that has always, inspired me about working for these companies, and more specifically these founders, Brian Chesky at Airbnb and Logan Green and John Zimmer at Lyft. When you're sitting around a boardroom and you are evaluating these problems, these challenges for these business models, and a lot of time the challenges happen because these businesses just grow so fast, and these challenges aren't contemplated early on. They always err to the side of what is good for their stakeholders. There's no 100% of the time. Now, the challenge that happens, I'll use Airbnb as an example. You always hear that businesses, the number one stakeholder for a business obviously is shareholder, right? And driving shareholder value. It's just not the way they think anymore. It's just not the case at a company like Airbnb. And I'll explain that a little bit, unpack it. I actually think there's like 5 different stakeholders that Airbnb thinks about. One, of course, is the shareholder, especially now that they're a public company.
They have to now.
They have to now. That's more important. They also have to think about their employee base, right? Are they happy? Are they there? Are they the right people? Do they have the right integrity and trust? Is that the right squad that they've assembled? They have to think about their host community, right? The people that are actually listing their homes on the platform. They have to think about their guest community as well, making sure that they're doing right by them. And then, of course, the 5th one, which I think is probably the most important, is the communities that they operate in globally, right? What are they doing to those communities? And I can tell you unequivocally, anytime that there has been something that has been developed with Airbnb, a problem that's been exposed that does not help the community that they operate in, they adjust and they make sure that they've got a solution for that. Now, a lot of times it's painful to go through those steps until there's.
But they react.
But they react, and they react with high integrity every single time. Now, when you're trading off between all of those different stakeholder groups, you can't satisfy all of them all the time, every time. But those are the type of that's the type of decision making tree that they go through every time they think about the impacts.
If what you're saying is accurate, it's nice to hear that people try to think of the greatest good, like between the groups, instead of just XYZ. So that's nice to hear. Now, that being said, let's talk about the bad of Airbnb around here. We have a lot of old homes with old septic systems. So what's happening is people might buy an old home with an old septic system that's designed to run off of 3 to 4 people in the house. And now if you run Airbnb, you can have basically 12 to 15. So that's the feedback that comes in.
Airbnb created a line for neighbors to contact, right? If there's a problem, if there's a party house or something going on, Airbnb actually created a line so that they can actually get that feedback, right? Like that's a company that's like saying like, we want to hear this stuff. And so I actually do think, and I'll give you just like a higher level example and of where it becomes complicated. Airbnb now has 6 million listings all around the world, right? I think they're in 212 countries or something like that. You know, it's incredible. Really tough to develop policy, rules, and regulations for every specific town. That said, there are some macro concerns that Airbnb does address. So, just one random example. In cities, there were people very early on who were buying up 10, 15, 20 units in a building, right? And the promise of Airbnb was that we wanted to create local experiences where people could feel like they belong, right? And have those authentic experiences. Well, that doesn't really do anybody well, right? Other than that owner, right? They're effectively creating a hotel in that building. There is a way that, and a lot of cities have done this, where they've restricted the number of units that one host can have, as an example, in cities to really help with the rental, obviously what's on the rental inventory. Go to the other side of the spectrum. There were a lot of vacation rental markets, ski towns, for example, whose businesses, whose economies were all predicated on bringing more people into the town. And they only had 3 or 4 hotels, but they had a lot of homes that were sitting there dormant, right? And so those towns were coming to us saying, please, how do we get somebody to buy 10 or 15 units in a building and increase the supply of the town, right? And so similar problem, total opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think that, there are solutions for all of those. And those will all come with time. So, for the septic, as an example, I would say that host should have a responsibility on them, right? To say, hey, here it is. Either I got to make a different investment in the system that we're using here. It is it's a business. We got revenue coming in. We should be held responsible for that, which will also, by the way, create a better experience for their guests ultimately and help their property value. But those are just conversations that can be had on a local level.
I get you. And also my personal opinion is it does come back to the homeowner to do the right thing. And, let's get off of Airbnb. Let's talk about other stuff.
Yeah, sure.
I already know what you like about Nosara. I know you like the surf, the community, and people, blah, blah, blah. I get all the likes. What are your dislikes?
Or my dislikes about Nosara? So I'd say two things pop into my mind. One is when I think about my 2 favorite restaurants that are in town, they're both locally owned, right, by people that are from Costa Rica. I wish there was more of that feeling in town. Right. I mean, you really got to look for it. My favorite restaurant, Pacifica Azul. I love the family that's there, local family. The food is absolutely incredible.
And what's your second?
Probably Rosie's.
Okay. Then what's your third?
My third would be, I mean, La Luna is amazing to sit on the beach and look out there.
Hey, what's your take on Keone's versus Palada?
With the roads the way they are now, I think they're kind of one and the same. It's kind of a nice patch sort of off to the side.
So you like them both?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think they both hold something really special. It's interesting. I think when you use the frame of how long are you going to be here for, if you're here for a week and you're trying to get into as much surf as you possibly can, nice to be able to grab your board and walk down to the surf in Keone. But if you're here for any period of time, it's nice to sort of get, away from all the hustle and the bustle.
It is. Now, if you don't mind, how's your surfing experience going?
Well, I'm a total noob. I started early in my time here with a great coach, Ollie Davies.
Shout out to Ollie.
Yeah, another, and more than anything, it's just super fun to go out with him. But it was great because he took a lot of the experience from Surf Simply, and just, really like a regimented approach and really made sense to me. And then, actually encouraged me to go over to Surf Simply for a week with Rue and the team there, which is an experience that is just absolutely second to none. And so I think between those two experiences together, I definitely hit my goal. My surfing goal coming to Nosara was I just want to be able to grab a board anywhere in the world, not look like a total idiot, and be able to surf safely and have some fun. And I think I've definitely hit that point. The problem when you hit that point, though, is I'm sure and anybody else who's listening to this podcast who surfs knows, once you hit that point, that's where the real addiction starts. So I think I'm in trouble.
Yeah, I think you're screwed, man.
Yeah,
you're gonna end up buying someplace here.
Yeah, it's over. It's over.
But that happened to all of us. Like, you're not alone. That's just kind of how this story goes. You come to Nosara a couple times, you're like, wait a second, that was different. And then you keep going back. And then once you get into surfing, once you get to the competence point, I guess I would say, like, once you get to where you can paddle out, catch a wave, have a good time, it's really hard to get away from it then, because it's just such a unique feeling, and there's such a release of emotion and sliding down the face of a wave and timing it right, having a bad session, then having a good one, just the whole ups and downs. It's a sticky sport.
Yeah, and that's just the sport of it. Everything else, and again, with the backdrop of Nosara, everything that comes along with surfing, right? Just being down on that incredible beach and then grabbing, a fresh juice on the way up, and, the camaraderie that you start to build in the lineup and seeing those people around town, all of that, with the backdrop of the actual sport is, that's a killer combo.
You brought up a good point there. That I agree with you. It's strange because you might have somebody you surf with and don't even speak the same language or don't know each other. But if he saw you have a dynamic experience, or you saw him or her have a dynamic experience, you connected. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's so much positivity out there, and, I've heard horror stories of other lineups and it being aggressive. I don't have a lot to compare it to, just my own story here. And I will tell you, like, it is fun out there, and people are positive and rooting you on and giving you waves. And, definitely as a rookie, I've dropped in on a couple of people. And if anybody's watching the podcast, I apologize. But everyone knows sort of where you're at, and, pretty positive out there.
Man, I appreciate you coming in. It's always a pleasure talking with you. I have a feeling we'll have you back, and then we can bust your balls about it if any of your predictions were right or wrong, and then we'll ask you for future advice.
Anytime. I'm always happy to drop in here. Like I said, I'm great at dropping in.
Yeah, it sounds like you got that one covered.
Yeah.
The tricks, nose rides, turns, and that type of stuff, is it on the future? Like, are you going to keep going, do you think? Or are you going to get back to your cold life and get busy and off you go?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think, at this stage of my life going back to that, that rat race. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts of this pandemic, right? Is, people are really saying to themselves, wow, that's really important to me now. Surf will forever be a part of my life. There's no question about that. Nosara will forever be a part of my life. No question about that. But the question is just, how do you weave that in? But I think if it's that important and becomes a priority, you'll figure it out.
Well, hey, maybe you keep coming down, and I'll have boards and stuff or whatever you need to use. But one of these days I want to learn how to snowboard or ski or do something cold. I'm from Florida, and then I moved here, so I have no clue how any of that stuff works.
Come on up. You asked a question earlier about what's tough about Nosara. I love the 4 seasons back home. It's a nice part of living back home, where it gets cooler and then it gets more, like, you get excited when that summer's coming, and then the summer is intense because it's so short. So everybody's getting it in. That's a really nice, really nice
that makes
part.
Sense.
Yeah, it's really great. But actually, just really excitingly, just bought a foil for back home, which I am super excited about. So we'll be doing that behind the boat, and if I can get good enough, I've seen a couple people out in the lineup foiling.
Yes, they're here. One of my good friends, the guy who brought me down here, is really into foiling now. Yeah. Actually, he introduced me to Kai. Eric, shout out to Eric from the Progression Project. Anybody who sees this, go follow him on Instagram.
It's great. The greatest part, I think, about being down here for the last 6 months, I mean, other than obviously just being down here and learning how to surf, is just being a student again of something. And I totally lost that love for being a student, understanding what it is to be a good student and to be stoked for the next lesson and to be practicing along the way and seeing that development.
But then you really, I'm sure, enjoyed Ollie and Surf Simply in particular, because they're very studious in the approach to teaching. And
and they're those guys are so great, and the whole team at Surf Simply and Ollie. And I think the thing that really distinguishes them, there's a lot of people in various sports who are really, really good at their sport or their craft, who are just terrible coaches. And Ollie and the Surf Simply crew, like, they're not great at their sport. They are great at their coaching craft. And they just make it so much fun. So much fun. What they've built here is a real testament to their character. They're sort of like what you see, and then all the stuff that happens around the play. The work that the whole team at Surf Simply is doing with their kids club is absolutely incredible, and their focus on integrating into the community. And that's a real great baseline, a great challenge for other business owners that are here. But there's so much interesting stuff that's popping up here. And I hope that everyone takes that to heart, right? The integration into the community, because that's what makes or breaks it.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.